Before the advent of Christmas specials and Hallmark films, there was the beloved tradition of entertainment for long winter nights: storytelling. You'd gather round a fire, blankets tucked in and candles close at hand. You might even pour a dram or make a hot chocolate before settling in for a story. While some of these stories might have been cosy tales of folklore and fairies, others were, as Andy Williams says, scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago. The shorter days and darker nights of winter are the perfect time to indulge in a ghost story. There's something about a cold, dark setting that makes hauntings that much more eerie, more corporeal. So, light the fire, pour yourself a dram, and settle in for 3 spooky stories from Edinburgh, Scotland. Our first story takes us to a mysterious building somewhere in Edinburgh. We don't know what suburb it sits in. We don't even know the street name. All that we know is the house number: 17. Number 17 dated back to the 1850s. A beautiful detached Victorian building. It was abandoned at the turn of the 20th century and quickly fell into decay. Ivy weaved into the brickwork and through the broken windows, seeming to claim the building for the earth. Local residents noticed that occasionally, very late at night, they'd hear laughter and strange sounds coming from the house. But when they peeked out to look, there were no lights on, no movement, no signs of life at all. They came to believe the house was haunted. Then in 1915, a young couple new to the area bought number 17 at a remarkably cheap price and converted it into a beautiful guest house. Business thrived and the guests seemed happy, for the most part. Those staying in the attic room never seemed rested when they appeared downstairs in the morning. They looked tired, uneasy, and said they hadn't slept well, or at all. Some sheepishly admitted they had had a constant feeling of being watched while in the room and couldn't fully relax. The servants agreed. They too felt as if someone was watching them and noticed that no matter how early in the day a fire was lit, the room never seemed to warm up. Amongst themselves, they began to call it the unfriendly room, a strange name, but one that seemed to fit perfectly. One night, from their bedroom on the 2nd floor, the owners heard a terrifying scream peal out from upstairs. The landlord bounded up to the attic room, wrenched open the door, and there stood one of the housemaids in her nightgown, staring up at the ceiling, a look of terror upon her face. "Mary," the landlord called to her. She didn't budge. He moved closer, calling her name again, and still she stood rigid. Well, he eventually managed to move her, but poor Mary never spoke another word in her life. Whatever she experienced in the unfriendly room, she took to her grave. The owners closed the attic room door that night, vowing never to open it again. The story slowly spread throughout Edinburgh, eventually reaching a young divinity student named Andrew Muir. Immediately fascinated, he was determined to find out the truth about the attic room in number 17. He discovered the location and begged the landlord to allow him one night in the room. Of course, the landlord refused point blank. But I think Mr. Muir had the gift of the gab, because finally he relented on one condition. The young man was to take 2 bells with him into the room overnight. A high-pitched bell to ring if anything strange should occur, and a lower-pitched bell he was to ring if he felt that his life was in danger. That night, with Andrew Muir up in the attic room, The landlord was trying to settle into bed, unsure he'd be able to sleep, when he heard the insistent sound of the high-pitched bell tinkling from above. He leapt out of bed, rushed up the stairs, and was reaching for the door handle when the ominous, clanging sound of the lower-pitched bell rang out. He hesitated for a moment, his heart sinking, then turned the handle. There in the armchair sat Muir, staring up at the ceiling, a look of horror upon his face. The landlord approached and went to shake his arm and realised that Andrew Muir was dead. Guilt-ridden, the owners sold number 17 as soon as they could get rid of it and moved far away. There are many beautiful Victorian houses still standing in Edinburgh. Perhaps number 17 is now a private residence. Perhaps it has been converted for some other purpose, or perhaps, after years of abandonment, someone new to town has bought the property at a very good price, thinking what a lovely guest house it will be once they have completed the renovations. If you ever visit Edinburgh, you may want to look into the history of the hotel you stay in and make sure to check the street number too. Not every ghost story is set in a mysterious, unknown place. Others, we know exactly where they happened. Walking around the older part of the city can feel as though you are lost in a labyrinth of secret alleyways, wandering down paths leading to who knows where. One of Edinburgh's most famous legends regards an underground tunnel, said to have been built in the early 16th century, running directly under the Royal Mile and connecting Edinburgh Castle to Holyrood Palace. A secret tunnel such as this would provide a perfect escape route should either building come under attack. One midwinter night in the 1860s, a group of soldiers garrisoned at Edinburgh Castle were having a party, their commanding officer being away for the night. Drink flowed freely, and late in the night, someone came up with a hilarious joke to play on the residents of Edinburgh, to set off the 1 o'clock gun, not at 1 p.m. as usual, but at 1 a.m. instead. The loud bang of the empty shell being fired would no doubt amuse the sleeping residents of the town as much as the soldiers themselves. The drunken soldiers spilled out onto the ramparts, loaded the cannon and lit the fuse, laughing. However, they soon realised that the cannon had not been secured down. It went flying backwards into the castle wall, collapsing part of it. As the dust settled, the men noticed a set of worn steps heading down into the darkness. It started to dawn on them that this may be the entrance to the legendary tunnel. It may surprise you to hear that not one of these soldiers felt brave enough to explore, so they decided that the regimental piper, a boy of only 15 years old, should be sent down. Perhaps he was the bravest of them all, his role in the regiment being to play the bagpipes and lead the men out onto the battlefield. In this case, he could play the pipes as he walked along the tunnel, and the soldiers would follow the sound above ground. The piper had to be bribed with much whiskey, but eventually he descended down into the dark. The soldiers ran out onto the esplanade, and it seemed the plan was working. They could hear pipes beneath their feet. The music began to move down the Royal Mile and continued almost to the gates of Holyrood Palace, then suddenly stopped. The soldiers waited for the music to start up again, but after a few minutes of silence, they grew concerned. They ran all the way up the Royal Mile, worried for the boy and feeling guilty for sending him down there alone. Back at the castle, at the top of the mysterious stairs, the piper had not reappeared. 2 men ventured down to find and retrieve him, but they returned only a few minutes later looking very pale. They said that they had walked around 100 yards in a narrow tunnel before it opened into a large room, At the end of the room was a sheer face of rock. No way over or around it, and no path through. The room was empty. There was no sign of the piper, and he was never seen again. To this day, some people say that if you are out on the Royal Mile very late at night, when the traffic has died down and there are few people around, you'll hear the faint sounds of bagpipes. But they're not coming from the north or the south. They're coming from directly below your feet. And that young boy is still trying to find his way out. Uphill from where that tunnel begins, at the summit of Castle Rock, lie buildings steeped in centuries of royal history. This citadel contains the stately courtyard of Crown Square, enclosed to the south by the Great Hall, dating back to the early 16th century, and the Royal Palace on the western side, originally built in the 15th century. There have been several sightings of a woman dressed in white or grey, roaming the corridors, halls and courtyard. On one dark winter evening some 20 years ago, an officer of the Light Infantry Regiment was making his way through Crown Square when he saw what looked like a white cloud of smoke hovering in the middle of the courtyard. He looked on as the cloud transformed into the shape of a tall woman in a floor-length white dress. She glided silently across the square and straight through the closed door of the Great Hall as he stared on in disbelief. He and another soldier investigated the building and those nearby, finding no trace of the woman. Just an hour later, an officer guarding the crown jewels in the royal palace detected a strange smell in the air around him. It was musty and sweet, with an undeniable hint of cinnamon. A cold, chilling sensation wrapped around the back of his neck, like icy hands gripping onto his skin. The frigid feeling crept down his spine, panic rose in his chest, and after a moment, frozen to the spot, he managed to shake himself free. Unsure of what to do, he contacted the technical officer to come and inspect the area and ensure the priceless crown jewels were safe. By the time they arrived, the smell had dissipated and all seemed normal. 100 years earlier, in that very same building, another strange happening occurred. Originally where the monarchs lived, eventually the rooms in the royal palace were used as living quarters. The last castle warden to live there made rooms available for his mother-in-law. One morning he greeted her as usual, asking if she had slept well. She laughed quietly, replying that while she had indeed slept well, she had slept little, having spent much of the night talking to a fine lady who had entered her room. She described the woman as aged in her 50s, wearing a long grey dress. The lady was very kind and happy to talk to the warden's mother-in-law, who had not at all been disturbed by her presence. In fact, the lady in grey visited her many times after this. Who were these apparitions? Could one be the ghost of Janet Douglas? In 1537, she was accused of treason by King James V. All knew these accusations were baseless, but the king despised the Douglas clan, having been imprisoned by that family as a child. In retaliation, he declared Janet guilty of attempting to poison him and had her burned at the stake just outside the castle walls. If we consider this tragic end, it wouldn't be surprising if she still wandered the castle grounds, weeping. Or perhaps the apparition is Marie de Guise, mother of Mary, Queen of Scots. She ruled Scotland for 6 years as Queen Regent, but after the Scottish Reformation in 1560, the devoutly Catholic Marie found herself surrounded by political enemies. She died of natural causes that same year within the rooms of the royal palace, but the Protestant nobles would not allow her burial. Instead, her body was kept in a lead coffin inside the castle's chapel for 9 months. Eventually, her supporters smuggled the coffin out and she was escorted back to her homeland of France, her final resting place. But having gone so long without a decent burial, does she rest? Within the walls of Edinburgh Castle, tragedy, treachery and betrayal have played out. Perhaps the people who lived here so long ago do remain in some way, their memories echoing through time, calling out to us to remember them. Edinburgh has been inspiring storytellers for centuries. Its dark and medieval streets, the perfect setting for a ghost story. And we haven't even touched on the city's underground vaults. But that is a story for another day, or a darker night. As you bank the fire, bid goodnight to family or friends and curl up in bed tonight, we hope you rest soundly. And remember, each creak of the floorboard or groan of the walls is nothing more than the sound of a well-loved house, as long as you are not resting in number 17.